Welcome to Stacs ESG Conversations Show. Today we feature Benjamin Soh. He's the founder and managing director of Stacs, one of Asia's leading ESG data and technology companies, and he comes out of Singapore. Now, Ben, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Now, Ben, give us an overview of Stacs and your history.
Stacs is a Singaporean company. I'm the founder, and we started 4 years ago, as a fintech firm serving the needs of financial sector, banks, asset managers, and insurance companies as an example. Initially when we started, we wanted to provide digitalization opportunities, but very quickly we realized that every one of our clients had a very clear pain point, which is the lack of ESG data. And that's why we decided to focus on this pain point, and we've developed ESGpedia as our main product.
Okay, talk to us about the pain point specifically in the ESG space that you're trying to solve.
Sure. So many financial institutions today, they have mounting regulations that are being placed on them, for ESG requirements. But however, a lot of the data that they are seeking to get is missing. For example, there's a lack of mid-cap to small-cap data in the APAC regions, and also a lack of data at the asset level. And whatever they're dealing with in the financial sector usually comes in the form of package ratings, which they rather do without, because then what they really want to have is the underneath data, that will comprise of the individual assets.
Okay, so that is interesting. Then you started off being very focused on the financial sector, but obviously ESG and ESG compliance is becoming more and more important across markets. Now, for example, in stock markets like Bursa Malaysia and SGX, ESG reporting is mandatory for all listed companies. So tell us how are you helping these companies in terms of reporting beyond purely the financial sector?
Exactly. So, right, Brian, even when we started with the financial sector, very quickly we realized that because the financial sector banks every sector, finances every sector. So ultimately, they will have to be able to capture data from several sectors. And in the last 3 to 5 years, there are several regulations that have already been implemented across the world to already mandate, ESG disclosures at the corporate level. So that's where countries like Singapore, Malaysia, as you mentioned, or even the first country that implemented this at a large scale was the EU, that actually forced spillover effect, because when the buyers are required to disclose ESG data, they are typically requiring their suppliers to also have this data. So that's where the pain point is. While large companies typically have the means to do it, those suppliers that they are buying from struggle with having the right data in place. So I think we have to be able to approach this problem with the use of technology to be able to help scale up these capabilities and also remove these barriers to entry.
And this is a huge problem. And as you said, if you use one specific example, if you're a supplier to Unilever and you're in ASEAN and you've got several markets, Unilever will require you to, across your whole supply chain, give them ESG reporting. And that, if you are early in the cycle without technology, is going to be very, very difficult to do.
It's almost impossible. I mean, somebody like a Unilever may have, 10,000 companies that they are purchasing from. They will need a system. Now, those 10,000 companies in different sectors would also need some type of digitalization to be able to help them accomplish this mission impossible. So, there are certain things like, for example, and besides that, in different sectors, there are different requirements. So in certain sectors like your, iron and steel, in cement, for example, in the EU, they have already come under this regulation called Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM. That's where, all these imports into EU that make up 60% of their, carbon emissions today actually do need to be required to disclose embodied emissions data. Okay, so these suppliers of such materials are now finding it hard to be able to report. Okay, and they all need a solution to be able to have all of this data be able to be captured in a usable manner to be able to be consumed by these buyers.
Okay, Ben. Then in that case, how do your solutions bring everything together? You've got everything from ESGpedia to VETA to your various ESG playbooks. So how do you help companies bring all this together?
Yeah, so I think ESGpedia is trying to be something for everyone, right? So we support companies at varying maturities in their sustainability journey. So even if they are just a small company, okay, so we already have something for them where we digitalize all the various inputs into carbon emissions number. Example, your liters of fuel, different grades of fuel like petrol, diesel, and gas, okay, can be converted automatically to a carbon emissions number. Your kilowatts per hour, okay, depending on which country that you're operating in, okay, will be converted by a conversion factor to give you your scope 2 emissions. So what I just described is scope 1 and scope 2, which usually is the bare minimum fundamental data that every company will require. And that's just the level 1 data that we have. If I go a bit further, we talk about playbooks like different industry sectors. The international SASB standard has classified 77 sectors, and there are different user journeys in reporting sustainability. So obviously we can use technology to digitalize, okay, this entire program so that if I was a sector, one of these sectors in the 77, I do not need to know the other 76. I just follow this sector's playbook and have this reporting journey developed for me on a stage by stage basis and help me complete my requirement.
Okay, now tell us about how you've gone to market and sort of the partnerships that you've brought on board, the Monetary Authority of Singapore obviously being one of them, in order to leverage on these sort of platforms and allow then companies to quickly be onboarded and then be ESG compliant with their customers.
Yeah, so I actually like that you brought up this question because I think for us to succeed, we have to do so as an ecosystem or even as a society where there are many components to it. I was always reminded by a quote by Obama in 2015 at the Paris Agreement. He mentioned that we are the first generation to feel the effects of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it. So it is really a society-wide approach, and that's what I've been very heartened to experience. For example, in Singapore, okay, we've managed to partner with the Monetary Authority of Singapore in their project Green Prints. Okay, so that's actually an initiative that the MAS has been able to support certain industry platforms like ours, okay, to be able to help grow us, okay, and give us guidance and leadership to work with the ecosystem like the financial institutions and the corporates in different industry sectors to derive solutions that will be supporting them. Beyond the MAS, we have also managed to partner with other regulators in a few different countries in ASEAN, okay, and we are starting to see the effects of ecosystem impact, where financial institutions, large corps, and their suppliers come together under a government agency supported initiative to be able to drive even faster adoption of sustainability practices.
Now, how exactly then are you, from an execution standpoint, you started off in Singapore. As you've expanded out of Singapore, and maybe you can give us an idea of your footprint, what have you seen in terms of the different levels of adoption among different countries and different size of businesses?
I think we are quite fortunate to be in ASEAN, not just in Singapore, but actually in ASEAN, because ASEAN could have the opportunity to be a kind of like an EU region, because we can think regionally too. So, the ASEAN Taxonomy Board, which is all 10 countries, regulators, and central banks, have come together to create an ASEAN taxonomy for sustainability. So with this ASEAN taxonomy, we are now having a coordinated approach to target the certain sectors that are most material to ASEAN, and of course, that what makes ASEAN famous as a supply chain to the rest of the world. So I think what's happened is that we have also started to focus on ASEAN as our market. Okay, we have started to partner with financial institutions, corporates, and certain government agencies in this region, okay, to be able to expand the adoption and also be able to enable more companies to get started on their journey.
Now, one of the things that you talked about earlier in the conversation, but is very, very important, is legislation and compliance that has come into and increasingly across the world. One of the most recent one is the new International Sustainability Standards Board.
Yep.
And they've got a Scope 3 emissions update. Could you tell us a little bit more about this, and also who does this really apply to?
Yeah, So I think, with the release of these ISSB standards, where they said that scope 3 would become part of the standard and therefore in scope, many people see this as a challenge, right? But I actually do see this as an opportunity because, the ISSB is actually, incorporated by the IFRS, which is the financial reporting standard. And by them adopting sustainability, it also means that we are seeing the future where financial reporting and sustainability reporting will be one and the same process. Okay, so that will be able to relieve many companies of like duplication work, and also number two, okay, it will also make it a common thing to do. Just like even if you have a mom and pop shop, you will also make your own financial statements to report to the taxman. Okay, so that's where sustainability will also take on this normalized road. Okay, and while the headline says scope 3 emissions is in scope, okay, the good news is because it becomes a normalized or common thing to do, many companies, if you read into the guidance, they do say that they require the companies to get started with only scope 1 and scope 2 for the first year, whereby if all the companies are producing scope 1 and scope 2 reports for the first year, logically speaking, the following year, you will be able to have all the suppliers that you have come under you and therefore aggregate their scope 1 and scope 2 into your scope 3. So this is how, again, the ecosystem effect will take place again, where I am able to leverage on the reports of the SMEs to be able to quantify my own scope 3, and vice versa, my own number will be able to be contributing to my client's scope 3 report. So I think what ISSB is doing here is actually something that gives us a feasible chance of actually, firstly, standardizing what exactly do we need to report, and secondly, okay, having this change driven on a society-wide effect.
Okay, but so here's the challenge. Now I want to wear my hat as an SME entrepreneur. I have a couple of global clients. I'm based in Malaysia or Philippines or Indonesia, and my clients have now told me, hey, you have to be more sustainable. You have to be in compliance with our requirements. Otherwise, you'll be cut out of our supply chain.
Yes.
How do I start my sustainability journey and future-proof my business?
Yeah. So definitely you need to start collecting your own data points. Okay, what's important is that you need to know that you have to produce at least these two things called scope 1 and scope 2 emissions.
Okay,
so
how do I find out? Well, normally would my clients give me that information?
Yeah, so I think there are two things here that are helpful. Number one, ISSB has already confirmed what is scope 1 and scope 2, which is in the GSG protocol. So that is already ready as a guide and as a standard. Okay, and number two, technology platforms like us, not just us, but like us, there are several technology platforms that will be able to distinctly show you, okay, that a scope 1 and 2 is equivalent to certain data points that you need to fit into the system.
Okay, now who are again, as the entrepreneur itself,
Yeah.
who do I then bring on board as a team to help me in my sustainability journey to start the process?
Yeah. So what we will usually advocate, and this is what makes us a little bit unique. We want to make it, simplified enough, okay, that it will be a seamless process. So we have partnered with certain entities like the United Nations, okay, to be able to come up with a simplified, digitalized, automated program where the various data inputs like your fuel consumption could be fed into the system and automatically generate the numbers that you need. In other words, your traditional accounting will require you to go and budget for your fuel, right? And also pay for your electricity consumption. So these utility bills or fuel consumption are now data that you already had anyway, also being able to be used into creating a scope 1 and scope 2 report. And that's something that we want to seamlessly integrate into your systems.
Okay, so now a different scenario then. I run $1 billion public listed company. I'm in property development. I have started the sustainability journey by appointing my head of communications basically as the head of sustainability and communications. I now realize that we need to do more. we've got, because we are listed on a stock exchange, and obviously we need to do more. How would you advocate us then moving to the next level?
For certain large corporates, we have always been working with them to help enable their ecosystem. So in other words, their suppliers usually. So what we really want to help them with is to create a program that will be able to help their suppliers come on board easily. They will do whatever that I just described for the SMEs, because ultimately their data as an aggregated level will be able to support you as a large corporate in your own report, and therefore closing the data gap that you might be facing today, which is a lack of data of your own suppliers. So yes, not just helping yourself as a company, but also being a leader in the truest sense to enable your entire supply chain is the way forward.
Ben, this has been a very enlightening conversation. I've learned a lot, and I realized that, when you learn more, you actually realize how little you actually know. And but before we leave, Ben, any final thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with?
Yeah, during this journey, sometimes people ask me, oh, is it worth it to start getting on this train? Or, is there cost involved? Is it going to be too difficult? Okay, but I always like to remind that, with the regulations that are coming in, this already being implemented in EU and several regions, okay, it's really not so much of a choice nowadays, and especially in the near future. We think that, sustainable companies have a higher chance to be profitable. And to be profitable, one must be sustainable, because otherwise you are not going to get any more business. So I think it's better that companies get started earlier, okay, and any person in the interested in this space can get to action faster.
Now, Ben, thank you very much for taking your time to
Thanks,
be on the
Brian.
show. Now, we've been speaking to Benjamin Soh, the founder and managing director of Stacs, on BizStack's ESG Conversations Show. I'm Brian Fernandez, and you've been watching and listening to BizStack's ESG Conversations Show. This interview will be on our website, www.bizstack.asia, as well as our syndication partners, TV stations, radio stations, and websites. Thanks a lot for tuning in.